Okay, so this is the first part of what will probably be a two-part lecture to replace tonight's lecture. And this is where we get into the rise of Islam, the Islamic Empire, and Islamic culture. So first, I should mention that these videos can only be about 15 minutes long. I'm using a program called Screencast-O-Matic, which allows me to show you what's on my screen and for you to see my face at the same time. But unfortunately, the videos take up a lot of space, and I can only upload them into YouTube on about 15-minute segments. So that's why I need to split the lecture up into two parts. So first, I'm going to begin with showing you a typically Byzantine church with the icon of Christ above the main door, a westward-facing porch, mosaic flooring, and a center, and the main sort of worship center. The sort of mosaic of Christ Pantocrator, Christ the Savior, and a small dome, usually two small domes. And you'll see when we get into Islamic architecture that it is, in a lot of ways, very similar to Byzantine architecture. Largely, the two cultures did influence each other and did borrow from each other artistically, intellectually, architecturally, and we'll see elements of that. This is things I've mostly already gone over with you, but this is just a chronology to keep in mind about the Byzantine Empire. So the protective walls of Constantinople were completed by about 450, at which point most scholars start calling the Byzantine Empire the Byzantine Empire instead of the Eastern Roman Empire. We already talked about Justinian recodifying Roman law, reconquering Italy, and building the Hagia Sophia, all of which was done in the early to mid-6th century. During the reign of Heraclius, we see attacks on the empire from both the Persians and later the Arabs. In 636, we see the Byzantine defeat the Battle of Yarmouk, which basically is the battle that's usually considered to be the end of Byzantine dominance of the Middle East and the beginning of Arab dominance of the Middle East. And we see Byzantine fortunes further declining in 679 with a defeat by the Bulgars, which led to the loss of most of the Balkans. I've already talked about Justinian quite a bit, so I won't dwell on him, but what you should basically know, born in Turkey, but Greek and Christian, he was the emperor in Constantinople, ruling over what we now call the Byzantine Empire, although he always referred to it as the Roman Empire, as did almost all of his successors. Some very late Byzantine emperors in the 13th and 14th centuries begin to refer to the empire as the Hellenic Empire, or the Hellenic Kingdom, which meant the Greek Kingdom or the Greek Empire. Western sources often referred to it as the Greek Empire or the Greek Kingdom, where Turkish and Arabic sources referred to it as the Roman Empire, because they had closer contact with the Byzantines, and that's what they called themselves. Justinian's consort was the Empress Theodora, who, according to one history, was a prostitute, according to another was a circus performer. In reality, there probably wasn't much difference. But nonetheless, aside from being oh so pretty, she was also oh so smart, and she was the guiding factor behind many of his ambitious policies. He tried to reassert Roman power in the West, conquering Italy and Africa and a bit of Spain, and he built the Hagia Sophia, at that point the largest church in Christendom, the largest church ever built, and remaining so until late in the Middle Ages. And he also sought to Christianize the remaining pagans and barbarians within Roman borders. Justinian, however, was extremely ambitious and left a number of problems. An overstretched empire that was not unified religiously. There were numerous heresies, numerous religious disputes, so not unified religiously, economically a mess, socially a mess, politically a mess. So although he left the empire larger, it's a very open question as to whether or not he left it any stronger. The Byzantine Empire was culturally a Greek and Christian state, although we should be careful by not saying ethnically, because it wasn't ethnically Greek at all. It was a mixture of ethnicities, and they didn't really make much distinction between people based on ethnicity, not even in terms of skin color. The distinction was basically, can you speak Greek? Are you Christian? Okay, then you fit into our social structure. Are you not? Then okay, then you're a foreigner in our social structure. The emperor was the supreme leader, occupying both a political, military, and largely religious role as well, with the patriarch being the official head of the church. The Byzantine church increasingly acted independent of the Western church, and increasingly from quite early on, from the 7th century on, we see really the development of two separate churches, one church in the east controlled by the Byzantine Empire, and one in the west controlled by the Pope in Rome. They had numerous threats on the frontiers, first from the Persians and the barbarians. One barbarian tribe, the Bulgars, settled within imperial territory in what is modern-day Bulgaria. And once the Persian Empire fell, they then faced threats from the Arabs, and we'll talk about the Battle of Yarmouk in a bit. So, I talked a bit last week about sort of Arabia before Islam, and you can see that it had a culture, that it was influenced by the Sassanid Persian Empire and the Byzantine Empire, that it was a mixture of religions, a mixture of ethnicities, but unified by language, by the Arabic language. And also unified by trade. Most of the Arabs were traders or merchants. The Kaaba was the main religious center. It was a place of worship where all the idols were worshipped. However, once Muhammad established Allah as the primary god of Arabia, only Allah was then worshipped in the Kaaba. There are two major ethnicities, the Arabs and the Bedouins, who were nomads, although ethnographically speaking, there's not a great deal of difference between them. The Bedouins were desert dwellers, nomadic pastoralists, constant movers, surviving through a mixture of raiding, plundering, and trade. So let's talk about Muhammad. He was born in Mecca as a caravan manager, as a merchant, and he made the Hijra, the journey to Medina, in 622. And this is called a journey, but it was really more like an exile, because he tried to spread his beliefs in Mecca, was forced to leave due to the unpopularity, went to Medina, developed a following, and later conquered Mecca. He had a religious experience over several days, and emerged from this religious experience, which he had in a cave, to say that he was a prophet of God, the prophet of God, and that this God was Allah, who was the same God that the Christians and the Jews worshipped, and thus the Christians and the Jews were people of the book, or the Quran. They just worshipped differently, and incorrectly, one could say, according to Muhammad's version of events. He was apparently a very charismatic speaker, was quite wealthy from his time as a caravan manager, made an advantageous marriage both politically and economically, and was able to attract a following. So the teachings of Muhammad, the revelations made to him, are called the Quran, and it has 114 chapters covering various things from history and politics to how to live a good or normal life. Also contained are Islamic law, Sharia law, it's often called, and the 5 pillars of Islam. This picture here is Muslims celebrating the end of Ramadan. Ramadan is a holy month in which all Muslims must fast from dawn to sunset. meaning that you can't eat anything after dawn and you can't eat anything before sunset. And it's usually during summer, so it's usually during some of the longest days of the year, so it is quite a sacrifice. And observance of this holy month is regarded as one of the 5 pillars of Islam, and we'll talk about the other pillars later. It was designed to replace the Jewish Day of Atonement with a whole month, and Muhammad instituted the fast during his stay in Medina, or his exile in Medina. So this shows Muslims on horseback celebrating the end of Ramadan. The 5 pillars of Islam are pilgrimage to Mecca, or the Hajj, charity, zakat, faith, shahada, prayer, salah, and fasting, sawm. And Ramadan would fall under fasting. And this is the Kaaba and pilgrims to the Kaaba. Okay, so how did Islam spread? Well, during his lifetime, Muhammad was able to spread Islam through most of Arabia, partially through conquest, partially through negotiation, partially through spreading of religion by attracting a following. By the end of his life, most of Arabia had converted to Islam. He'd also begun to lead attacks on sort of the Byzantine frontier. The first one was 629, but these were more like raids than conquest. Abu Bakr becomes caliph in 622, and the caliph is similar to the Byzantine emperor, both the sort of religious leader and the political military leader in the Islamic State. So this attack on Byzantium, which begins in earnest under Abu Bakr in 632, is called jihad, which means a holy war, and it's attacks against the Byzantines and the Persians. After Abu Bakr, the Prophet's son-in-law, Ali, becomes caliph briefly, but he's later assassinated, and Muawiyah becomes caliph, establishing the Umayyad dynasty, and moving the capital to Damascus. So the split between the 2 major branches of Islam, although there's several branches, begins relatively early, with the Shiites supporting the followers of Ali, and the Sunnis being the supporters of the Umayyads. Okay, so let's talk about jihad for a minute. Let's talk about jihad for a minute. So there's several attacks, the most important of which is the Battle of Yarmouk in 636. And I'll see if I can tell you about this battle in just about a minute. But relatively early, during the wars between Byzantium and the Persians, which kept Byzantine and Persian eyes away from Arabia, which helped Muhammad to unify it, Muhammad predicted the Byzantines would emerge victorious, or the Romans would emerge victorious, and that later they would conquer the Byzantines. And he sent a letter to the Byzantine emperor offering for him to convert to this new religion, which Heraclius, as emperor, refused to do after he just spent years trying to protect Christianity from the Persians, or at least convincing enough Byzantines that's why he was fighting the Persians, to stamp his war with a religious seal, as we can see in the assigned book, The First Crusader. So he sends this letter. Heraclius rejects it, which sets the stage for the later jihad. I'm going to stop here, upload this video, and continue this in the next one.